Adrienne Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her downtown office, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over the skyline. From up here, everything looked smooth, orderly, even elegant. Her company, Nova Line Logistics, had grown from a scrappy startup run out of a converted garage into a respected name in tech-driven supply chain solutions. Industry magazines called her a visionary. Clients praised her integrity. Employees, at least on paper, said they loved working there. But lately something felt off. It wasn't one big thing. More like 1,000 tiny cracks no one else seemed to notice. Client emails that used to arrive full of enthusiasm now carried polite but distant tones. Internal reports showed delays piling up without clear explanations. And during team meetings, the energy had shifted. Less collaboration, more careful silence. People smiled, nodded, said all the right things. But their eyes didn't match their words. Adrienne had spent 20 years building this company not just to succeed, but to mean something. She'd fought to create a workplace where people from all backgrounds could thrive, not just survive. She'd hired single parents, veterans, recent immigrants. She'd insisted on fair wages, mental health days, real mentorship. That wasn't just good PR. It was personal. She remembered what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated, talked over in rooms where she was the only black woman. She'd sworn her company would never make anyone feel that way. So why did it suddenly feel like the heart of the place was fading? She asked her leadership team. "Everything okay?" She'd say casually over coffee. "Team feeling good?" "Oh, absolutely," came the replies. "A few bumps, sure, but nothing we can't handle." They sounded confident. Reassuring even. But Adrienne had learned long ago that confidence could be a mask. And in business, especially in spaces where power and perception tangled tightly, masks were everywhere. One evening, after another strangely quiet all-hands meeting, she called her mother. Evelyn wasn't just family. She was Adrienne's first teacher, her moral compass, and the woman who'd raised her to see people, not titles. Evelyn had spent 35 years as a high school administrator, known for spotting dishonesty with a single glance and calling out injustice before it had a chance to take root. "I think something's wrong," Adrienne admitted, voice low, pacing her living room long after midnight. "But I can't prove it. Everyone says things are fine, but it doesn't feel fine." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then calmly, "Then you need to see what they don't want you to see." "How?" Adrienne asked. "I'm the CEO. The moment I walk in, people perform." "Then don't walk in as the CEO," Evelyn said. The idea came slowly, then all at once. What if someone could move through the office unseen? Not a consultant with a clipboard, not an HR rep with a badge, but someone so invisible, so ordinary that people would forget to act? Someone who could hear the unguarded conversations, see the real behavior when no one thinks they're being watched. Adrienne hesitated. It felt like a betrayal of trust. But then again, wasn't the real betrayal happening already in the shadows she couldn't reach? She took a deep breath. Would you be willing to help me?" Evelyn didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was steady. "If it means protecting what you've built?" "Yes." And so, the plan began. Adrienne worked with a trusted facilities manager, someone outside the main leadership circle, to quietly add a new name to the night cleaning roster. Lena Carter. The photo on the ID badge was slightly altered. Glasses, gray-streaked hair pulled back, a softer jawline. No one would recognize Evelyn Whitmore, retired educator, mother of a CEO. They'd see an older woman with tired eyes and worn shoes just doing her job. Evelyn practiced the part. She borrowed a uniform from a friend who worked in building services. She learned how to push a mop bucket without making noise, how to time her movements so she wouldn't interrupt late-night workers. She even rehearsed a slight limp. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make people assume she was fragile, harmless, invisible. The first night, Adrienne waited in her darkened office, heart pounding. As her mother walked through the front doors of Nova Line for the first time, not as a guest, not as family, but as staff no one would look twice at. Evelyn moved slowly through the lobby, head down, shoulders slightly hunched. A young analyst rushed past her, phone glued to his ear, barely glancing her way. At the elevator, a manager held the door, but only because his hands were full of coffee cups. He didn't say thank you when she held it longer. He didn't say anything at all. Upstairs, Evelyn started in the East Wing. She wiped down counters, emptied bins, refilled soap dispensers. All the while she listened. In the break room, two project leads were venting about all the new hires who don't know how things really work. One laughed and said, "Honestly, half of them got in because of that inclusive hiring push. Not that I'm complaining, makes my numbers look great." They didn't notice the cleaner quietly restocking napkins behind them. In another hallway, a senior director left his laptop open on a desk, screen glowing with internal budget sheets. Evelyn saw figures that didn't match the report sent to Adrian. She didn't touch it. She just noted the time, the location, the name on the door. By midnight, the office was nearly empty. Only a few stragglers remained, typing furiously or whispering in corners. Evelyn kept moving, her presence so routine it barely registered. But her mind was racing. This wasn't just about laziness or bad attitudes. This felt deeper, like a slow rot setting in where trust and respect used to live. When she finally clocked out at 2 a.m., her feet ached and her back throbbed. But more than that, her heart hurt. Not because of the work, but because of what she'd witnessed. This wasn't the company her daughter had poured her soul into. This wasn't the place Adrienne believed she was leading. Back at Adrienne's apartment over chamomile tea and silence, Evelyn shared what she'd seen. No exaggeration, no drama, just facts spoken softly but firmly. Adrienne listened, her face unreadable at first. Then her hands began to shake. "I thought I knew them," she whispered. "You knew who they pretended to be." Evelyn replied gently, "Now you know who they really are." Adrienne stared out the window again just like she had days before. But this time, her gaze wasn't lost in the lights. It was focused, clear. The doubt that had been gnawing at her now had shape, sound, evidence. And with that came something else, resolve. She wouldn't let this go. Not because she was angry, though she was, but because she owed it to every person who'd believed in Novaline's promise. To every employee who showed up with honesty, to every client who trusted them with their business, to herself. But this was only the beginning. Evelyn would return for more nights, because if the rot was real, it wouldn't stop at one hallway or one conversation, and Adrienne needed to see it all, every ugly truth, before she could rebuild what mattered most. The city slept below, unaware of the quiet storm gathering in that high-rise office. But upstairs, in a dim kitchen lit by a single lamp, two women sat side by side, ready to do what no one else would. Look beneath the surface, even when it hurt. The third night was colder than the ones before, rain tapping softly against the windows, the kind of quiet storm that made the building feel even more isolated. Evelyn arrived just after 10, her coat damp at the shoulders, her steps quieter than usual. She'd barely slept. Not because she was nervous, she'd faced tougher rooms than this, but because she kept replaying the things she'd heard. The casual cruelty, the entitlement. The way people spoke about Adrienne like she was a prop in their performance, not the architect of everything they took for granted. She knew tonight could be the turning point. If the rot was deep, it would show itself when people felt safest, late, tired, convinced no one of consequence was around. And tonight, she planned to be exactly where they wouldn't expect her. She started her route as always, East Wing first, then Central, then West. But this time, she lingered near the conference room on the 7th floor, the one with the glass walls and the expensive sound system. It was rarely used after hours, but she'd noticed the lights on twice now during her shifts. Someone was meeting there, secretly. Around midnight, she saw them arrive. Two people, both in leadership roles. Both people Adrienne had once called the backbone of our culture. They carried takeout bags and bottles of sparkling water, laughing like they were on a casual date, not in an office after dark. Evelyn ducked into the supply closet across the hall, leaving the door cracked just enough to see and hear. At first, it sounded like harmless venting. Complaints about workload, jokes about corporate jargon, but then the tone shifted. "You know," one said, leaning back in his chair, "the only reason we keep getting those government contracts is because of her face. Let's be real," the other smirked. "Yeah, they checked the box, black female CEO, and suddenly we're innovative partners. Meanwhile, we're using the same outdated software as half the vendors in the city." They laughed, but it wasn't friendly. It was smug, dismissive. And don't get me started on that equity bonus she pushed last quarter, the first one added, swirling his drink, handing out extra cash like it grows on trees. Meanwhile, I had to explain to my team why their actual performance didn't matter as much as, what was it? Lived experience? They both chuckled again, louder this time. Then one lowered his voice, almost conspiratorially. Between us, I've been padding the vendor invoices for months. Just enough that it looks normal. Finance never checks. And even if they did, what's she gonna do, fire me? I run half this operation. Evelyn's breath caught, but she didn't move. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, her expression blank. Inside, though, something hardened. This wasn't just gossip. This was theft. And worse, it was contempt wrapped in privilege, disguised as insider humor. She stayed still for another 10 minutes, listening as they moved on to mocking junior staff, joking about who really earned their seat and who was just diversity decoration. Every word felt like a stone dropped into still water, ripples of damage spreading far beyond that room. Then, as they packed up to leave, one of them spotted her cart outside the supply closet. Ugh. Is that cleaner still here? He muttered, stepping into the hallway. Evelyn didn't look up. She pretended to be sorting rags in her bucket, back slightly hunched, eyes down. He walked right past her, then stopped. Hey, you. Yeah, you. She turned slowly, as if startled. Be careful with that trash can, he snapped, pointing to a bin she hadn't even touched. Some of us actually work for a living. Don't go knocking things over like you don't care. She nodded quickly, mumbling an apology she didn't mean. He rolled his eyes and walked off, his colleague trailing behind with a half-laugh. The moment they turned the corner, Evelyn's shoulders straightened. Her eyes, once downcast, sharpened. She didn't feel insulted. She'd been called worse in her decades of navigating spaces that weren't built for women like her. But she felt something deeper, clarity. These weren't just lazy employees. They were predators in suits feeding off the very system Adrian had built to protect people like her. She finished her shift methodically, wiping surfaces, refilling soap, checking every room. But her mind was already elsewhere, already drafting the words she'd say to Adrian when she got home. By 2:15 a.m., she was back in the apartment, rain still falling outside. Adrian was waiting, wrapped in a sweater, 2 mugs of tea on the table. Before Evelyn even sat down, Adrian asked, "Was it worse?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She took off her damp shoes, hung her coat, and sat. Then she told her everything. The padded invoices, the stolen contracts, the mockery, the theft disguised as just business. She spoke calmly, but her voice carried a weight that made Adrian go very still. When she mentioned the comment, "Some of us actually work for a living," Adrian's hands clenched around her mug. Not in anger. In grief. "They don't even see her," Adrian whispered. "They don't see you. They see a uniform and assume there's no person inside it." Evelyn reached across the table and covered her daughter's hand with her own. "They see what they want to see. That's always been true." Adrian looked up, eyes burning but dry. "I gave them everything. Chances, trust, a platform. And they used it to laugh behind my back while stealing from the company I built to lift people up." She stood abruptly, walked to the window, and stared out at the rain-slicked streets. "I can't let this go on. Not another day." "I know," Evelyn said softly, "but don't rush. Get the proof, all of it. Because when you act, it can't be about hurt feelings. It has to be about truth, for the people who still show up with integrity, for the ones who believe in what this place is supposed to be." Adrian nodded slowly. Then she turned back, her expression no longer lost but focused, like a blade being honed. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll call in the internal audit team, quietly, and I'll review every contract those two touched, every invoice, every client file." Evelyn didn't offer false comfort. She didn't say it'll be okay. Instead, she said what she'd always said when Adrian faced impossible choices. Do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the soft patter of rain and the ticking of the kitchen clock. Outside, the city slept, unaware that a quiet reckoning was already unfolding in a dimly lit apartment, over cold tea and unspoken resolve. Evelyn knew she'd go back one more time. One final night to confirm what she already knew. Because sometimes seeing isn't enough. You have to witness it fully so there's no room for doubt, no space for excuses. And Adrian? She was done pretending. The woman who'd built a company on fairness, dignity, and real human connection wasn't going to let it be hollowed out by people who saw kindness as weakness. The fourth night would be the last, and it would change everything. A month had passed since the quiet departures, and the office no longer felt like a stage. The air had changed, not in a dramatic way, but in the small, steady shifts that only real healing brings. People lingered after meetings to ask how someone's weekend went. Laughter in the break room sounded genuine, not forced. And for the first time in a long while, the feedback forms that landed in Adrienne's inbox weren't filled with careful neutrality. They were honest, sometimes messy, often hopeful. She'd kept her word. The two junior team members, both women who'd spent years doing the unglamorous work of keeping projects on track while others took credit, were now leading their own departments. They didn't get fancy titles or corner offices right away. Instead, they got trust, real responsibility, a seat at the table where decisions were made. And they rose to it not with arrogance, but with quiet competence and a deep care for the people around them. Adrienne also made good on her promise to listen. Every Friday afternoon, she hosted open coffee circles, no agenda, no hierarchy. Just people, mugs in hand, talking about what was working and what wasn't. At first, folks were cautious, but when they saw that nothing said in those rooms was used against anyone, that ideas were actually acted on, the walls began to come down. One young employee suggested a mentorship program pairing senior staff with new hires, not for performance reviews, but for real connection. Another proposed a monthly gratitude board, where people could leave anonymous notes of appreciation for coworkers. Adrienne approved both within a week, not because they were grand ideas, but because they came from the heart of the team. And through it all, Evelyn watched, from a distance this time. She'd returned to her quiet life in the suburbs, tending her garden, reading mystery novels and sipping tea on the porch. But she kept in touch, not with daily calls, but with the kind of knowing silence that only a mother and daughter share. She didn't need updates. She could hear the difference in Adrienne's voice, lighter, steadier, like someone who'd finally come home to herself. Then, one sunny Thursday morning, Evelyn got a call. "I'd like you to come by the office," Adrienne said. "Not as Lena, just as you." Evelyn hesitated. "Are you sure? I don't want to stir anything up." "It's not about stirring," Adrienne replied gently. "It's about honoring. You saved something important. I want you to see what it's become." So Evelyn came, not in a uniform, not in disguise, but in a soft lavender dress and her favorite pearl earrings, hair neatly pinned back, walking through the front doors like any other guest. The receptionist greeted her warmly, checked her in, and offered her a bottle of water. No one recognized her from the night shifts. To them, she was just a visitor, maybe a client, maybe a friend of the CEO. But as she walked through the halls, something unexpected happened. People smiled at her, not out of obligation, but out of habit. A man carrying a stack of files stepped aside to let her pass. A woman near the kitchenette asked if she needed directions. A group of young employees held the elevator when they saw her approaching. It wasn't because they knew who she was. It was because the culture had shifted. Kindness wasn't reserved for those at the top anymore. It flowed in every direction. Adrienne met her in the main collaboration space, the same room where those two leaders had once laughed about playing the diversity card. Now, it was filled with whiteboards covered in colorful notes, team photos, and a wall dedicated to employee spotlights. Each week, someone different was featured, not for hitting quotas, but for showing up with empathy, creativity, or quiet courage. "This is where we gather now," Adrienne said, handing her mother a cup of tea. "Not to perform, just to be." They sat together on a couch by the window, watching people move through the space, talking, brainstorming, even arguing, but always with respect. No raised voices, no eye-rolling, just real humans trying to do good work together. "I promoted someone yesterday," Adrienne said softly, "a single dad who's been here 5 years. He cried when I told him, said he never thought someone like him would get a real shot." Evelyn smiled. "And did you tell him why you chose him?" "I told him it wasn't just about his skills. It was about how he treats the intern who brings him coffee, how he stays late to help a teammate debug a system, how he never makes anyone feel small." Evelyn reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "That's the company you always meant to build." Later, as they walked toward the exit, a young woman approached them. She looked nervous but determined. "Excuse me," she said, glancing between them. "I don't mean to interrupt, but are you Ms. Whitmore's mother?" Adrian blinked. "You know who she is?" The woman nodded. "She mentioned you once, said you taught her that leadership isn't about titles, it's about seeing people. I wanted to say thank you for raising someone who actually lives that." Evelyn's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just smiled and said, "Thank you for reminding her." They stepped outside into the afternoon sun, the city humming around them. For a long moment, neither spoke. There was no need. Adrian never told the full story publicly. She didn't post about it on social media. She didn't give interviews about cleaning house or corporate justice, because this wasn't about drama. It was about dignity, about protecting a space where people could show up as their whole selves, without masks, without fear, without having to prove they earned their place. And Evelyn? She went back to her garden. But now, when neighbors asked how her daughter was doing, she'd say she's building something real. Months later, Novaline won an industry award for workplace culture, not because they applied for it, but because someone else nominated them. The judges cited authentic leadership, psychological safety, and a visible commitment to integrity at every level. Adrian accepted the award with a short speech. No grand declarations, just this. Great companies aren't built on perfect people. They're built on honest ones. And sometimes the clearest truth comes from the quietest corners. Backstage, someone asked if she'd write a book about her journey. She just smiled and said, "The real story isn't mine to tell alone." Because the truth was, this wasn't just Adrian's victory. It belonged to every employee who chose kindness over convenience, to every new leader who led with humility, to every person who showed up not to impress but to contribute. And somewhere, in a quiet kitchen far from headlines and boardrooms, a mother and daughter shared a pot of tea, knowing they'd done more than save a company. They'd helped bring it back to life.